please give a warm welcome to Chris Landon. Oh my goodness. Congrats, Chris.
Thank you.
This is awesome.
Appreciate it.
What I love about this film when I originally watched it is that there is internal pressures on the main character and external pressures. And what you do visually captures that. Cinematically, the language, right? Like,
Yeah.
like when she's talking to him and she's on a date, the camera is super steady. And then when she's dealing with the internal stuff, the camera, you're doing crazy angles and crazy camera work.
When I was working with my director of photography, Mark, I told him that I wanted to have 2 modes of shooting, and you just described it, which was Violet on a date, so she's performing for him, and that was always very steady. And then there was the Violet that's having to communicate with her tormentor. And whenever we go into that mode, it becomes much more subjective, and we're inside her head. And so, yeah, the camera angles start to kind of move and get, a lot of Dutch angles and obviously a lot of special lighting effects and things like that. And that was all just meant to really put the audience inside of her head as much as possible.
On the similar vein, the text also, when we start seeing originally the first text, it's like playful, and visually it changes, it metamorphoses as we watch the film. The texts have a life of their own visually.
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
I mean, this is a weird movie because it's like, in a lot of ways, like it's all the things that most directors and filmmakers want to avoid. It's like phones, single locations, people trapped at dinner tables. And so the big challenge of the movie was, trying to keep that interesting and visually interesting. And also, like, the first thing I knew right away was that I didn't want to look at phones. So, like, I tried to get away from that as quickly as possible. Once you get past all the memes and stuff that are part of the story, we moved into obviously the on-screen text, and the importance of that is obviously seeing an actor's face so that you're seeing how they're reacting, and also, what we did stylistically with those messages, because a big part of it for me was wanting to make sure that the audience felt like they were witnessing a real conversation, with a person. And so I had to create a personality in the absence of a person that you can actually see. And so that's why we went with this kind of slightly, it has like a techno feel to it, but it also is animated, and they're moving, and then they start to sort of progress as the movie does. And so there's obviously, we start to introduce colors into them, and they're interactive. There's a moment when Henry walks through one of the messages, and it distorts. And that was really just to kind of, like I said, keep it alive. Because again, it's an unusual situation to have a character having a conversation with a person you can't see.
But when we have the scenes with the text, there is negative space. So, translating, there is space on the side of the screen. So you were always, before shooting, you were conscious that there is going to be text on the side. So I need to
I
frame
planned where every text was going to go long before we shot it.
Okay.
Yeah, which was actually, I think, the company that did all the text messages when we delivered the movie to them. They were so shocked and relieved that we had done all that already, because they weren't used to that. Usually, like, people figure it out in post, but we had figured it out in prep. We knew exactly where we wanted them, and so we designed the shots to fit the text. The only one that was kind of a discovery was there's the moment where towards the end of the film where she's about to poison the shot, or so we think, and there's a giant text that comes up, and it was funny. We had a different shot there with a smaller text, and I remembered that really, because that giant wide shot was actually designed to be a security camera POV. And then I said, let's just not put the filter on it and just let that be a giant wide shot, and then put a huge text along the wall, along the glass. And that was the only one that we didn't plan for.
kudos to your production designer, Susie Cullen. That said, you built that restaurant from scratch. But what I was blown away when I watched the film is that within the set, she's always feels trapped. There's always, lines on the set or arches that make her feel like she's like trapped.
Yeah, we design, and Susie, she's our production designer. She's amazing. And again, we did this this is a relatively low budget movie by Hollywood standards. And so, she built this 12,000 square foot restaurant.
Which is a working restaurant.
It's a working restaurant. We had a real chef. We designed a real menu. We had real food.
I never want to eat at this restaurant because it has amazing views, but it looks like the food I don't want to eat.
Yeah,
this,
I know. The view's a 10, the food's a 5. Yeah. We talked a lot about the space and how, at one hand, we wanted the space to feel, it needed to have a wow factor. This is sort of like a first date thing, and we knew we wanted this to be a beautiful rooftop restaurant, but we also wanted, and so you'll look around the space and you'll see a lot of gold bars wrapping around the restaurant, and it was to make it feel like a gilded cage. Mm-hmm. And so she's trapped inside of it, and the audience is trapped in there with her.
But also, it reminded me of The Shining in the sense that the logic of the space. There's so many entries, and it just seemed like I didn't know the logic.
Right. We try to give the audience an immediate tour. It's funny, that was one of the shots I designed early on, is that once we get first that lobby, I wanted it to have a curve so that we would have, because the restaurant is a character in the film. Correct, yeah. And so I wanted to do it, that classic when you that famous, when George Clooney shows up in your movie and there's that special shot that's the introduction of that character. Well, we designed this whole entry point to the restaurant to give the restaurant its dramatic debut. You know what I mean? And so you have this really dramatic reveal because of that curving tunnel. And I lost my train of thought.
No, it's about the fact that we never know
there's so many geography. The geography is a little bit it's off kilter, but we do kind of bring the audience in and try to give them a little bit of the sense of the space. But you see that there are layers to the restaurant. There's tiers to it. But that was more just of a visual thing, just making sure that we could keep visual interest going.
The other thing that I found so impressive about what you did in this film is that every guest, all the supporting actors, there's something going on. There's a specificity to the diners. Tell us about creating that.
I am one of those people that I think every character and every actor is important. Mm-hmm. And I wanted everyone in the restaurant to feel like people we've all met in restaurants, and especially the waiter. We've all had Matt. He's amazing, but we've all had that charming, sweet, annoying, oversharing person who has other aspirations, and it is usually acting or comedy or something, and is always coming in at the worst possible moment. The truth of the matter is we created that character to be, and this is a little off topic, but I'll come back to it. But we created the character to be a release valve for tension, because it's you can't, it's an unsustainable place to stay throughout an entire movie, and so you need a break. So Matt was the break. But yeah, populating the restaurant with people that we kind of recognize, but also populating the people. It's all about, it's a whodunit, right? Mm-hmm. So the more personality and the more specific everybody is, the more you can cast suspicion on them, And I think that's what starts to make the audience start to second guess who it is, And that was a hat trick, though.
I was blown away by the costume design, that the specificity of the costume tells us so much. We only scan briefly certain characters, but there's so...
It's very specific. The costume design was really specific, and this was often in movies, when you cast background, that's usually an AD department thing, your assistant director and the people that work for them. They will just pick a bunch of people based on a certain age, you know, or varied ethnicity, et cetera. And this was the first time where I sat with the AD department and I handpicked every single person in the restaurant.
Wow.
And we sat there together and we built tables and stories for every one of them. Background stories, so that we knew who was on a date, who was there for an anniversary, who was there for prom, who was there for, you know, and there was also varying degrees, like who has tons of money and this is a routine thing, who is this a splurge, because that dictates what they're wearing as well. And so there was a lot of thought that went into it just to give that room and that whole world texture.
I've only seen the film once, and I was like so enthralled with all the backstories of the background people. Even like there is some crazy stuff that I gotta watch the film again. When she goes to the bar, and there's a guy watching
Porn.
And it was like, what?
But you miss it. If you blink, you miss it. He's looking at something on his phone.
Did you choreograph all of that?
Yeah.
And also, I was blown away, but what I was blown away was the continuities, like throughout the film. Like I noticed that people were being served desserts, and just the continuity. It's all choreographed.
That was the hardest part of the movie, and thank God I didn't have to worry about that. That was the AD department. If you went into their office, they had this massive wall that was a chart, a seating chart that detailed every course that every table was on and when they were on it, so that they could coordinate when diners were getting up and when people were joining and what meal they were having. And then moreover, because we start moving into the back half of the movie where eventually we're getting to stunts, we had to replace the diners near Megan with stunt actors. And so new diners needed to subtly come in who were actually stunt people, because they were going to be trampling, knocking people down, getting flipped over, et cetera. So that was like a whole other thing to coordinate, but they were amazing. They did such a good job with that.
And you shot the film chronologically. Tell
Almost
us
all of
about
it,
the
yeah.
necessity of having to shoot this chronologically.
It wasn't a necessity, it was a luxury. Like that's the big difference, is that, you know, typically on any movie, you will shoot things, you know, subject to, you know, your locations and actor availability and all the things that go into it. And we were able, because we had this set and we had all these people, we could shoot everything in order. And we didn't, a lot of times they'll do like things like block shooting, which is like when you shoot one direction and you kind of shoot out as much as you can to kind of move through the work as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
But we kind of had built the schedule properly so that we didn't have to do that. So like we would really concentrate, the focus was performance. And so we would shoot what we needed to and then move the cameras over, because the whole set was pre-lit. So we weren't, it's like in a typical movie set, there's giant lights that are getting moved around, and everything in this set was pre-lit, and we could do it all from this motherboard that we had. And so it took us no time. All we had to do was move the camera. It was just about moving that gear. And so it was relatively easy for us to be nimble.
You know, Tyler, I'm glad you brought up the lighting, because I was so impressed that the lighting changes, you know, to express her internal world. How, you know, walk us through, was that challenging?
It was fun. I wanted the movie to feel like more like, in some ways, a stage play, like theatrical, in that way. And again, we had enormous latitude and flexibility with the set. And, you know, I had only written one lighting gag into the script. And then as we were in pre-production and I started to realize that this was a really useful tool, I started to kind of, like, for example, I added the only time I really used it was when Violet is alone in the bathroom, and then the camera starts to pull up, and then we just keep going, and she becomes this little pinpoint of light. You see that she's sort of emotionally at the darkest point, because she realizes she is trapped and she now has to murder her date. And that was the only one that we had written. And then as I was in pre-production, I started to realize, no, wait, we have other opportunities to kind of be in her head and really sort of, like, for example, when she starts looking around the room, and she starts trying to eyeball people, like, who could it be? And he's talking to her, maybe I'm your waiter, or maybe I'm the lady, you know. That, again, was like, oh, we need to be using these lighting effects to stay deeply inside of her head. And so, yeah, it was just it's a funny movie because I'm normally, as a director, I don't like to be very, I don't know what the word is, like stylistic. I don't like to be too flashy because I always feel like your actors do all the work and the camera should be quiet. But in this movie, it felt like the opposite, where I felt like we needed to push things more because we were working against a lot of things that I just didn't want people to get bored. But I also wanted people to be in her head. And so I felt like I was able to push myself a lot more in that way.
On that vein, I know you, we're friends, but before that, I've always admired your films. Why? Because you always deal with heavy subjects underneath, brewing. Like this film deals with trauma and overcoming trauma. You don't hit us over the head with that aspect, but it's there. And in your previous films, like Happy Death Day, is that the right title? You know, we're dealing with loss. I mean, yeah, it's a horror film and is highly entertaining, but we're dealing with overcoming loss. And in this film, I mean, actually, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. It's about overcoming trauma, ultimately.
Yeah, and specifically domestic violence.
Correct. And then you just tell us about the aspect that it's underneath, it's not at the forefront, it's highly entertaining, but it's ultimately there.
My whole thing is like, I like to Trojan horse heavy stuff into really entertaining stuff, and pulpy stuff, and I think that's just my sensibility. I don't like movies that are just pure. This is the cutest thing I've ever seen. I just noticed this. The cute dog down here. Sorry.
You. That's our Trojan horse,
awesome.
Sophia.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like empty calorie movies. I want to say something. I want to have a conversation with the audience about some stuff that's kind of heavy. But I always say that, like, you know, movies are my therapy. And I've cracked the code because people pay me for my own therapy now. So I'm always working through a lot of stuff. And so in Happy Death Day and even, you know, in Freaky, like I was dealing with grief. And in this movie, we really wanted to tackle, you know, trauma, but specifically, like I said, you know, domestic abuse, and sort of really talk about how, about the resiliency of a survivor. You know, and I think what's interesting about Violet is at the top of the movie, you know, we present this woman. Obviously, when we get past the flashback, we present a woman who seems to have like pulled it all together, and that she's now helping other women. But there's a part of that is still a facade for her, and that she hasn't actually fully confronted that and how she feels about herself in this situation, and the circumstance, and her mama bear instincts as well sort of push her into a place that she didn't realize she had, that there was a well of strength that she hadn't yet tapped, and that she's able to come out on the other side of it. And that's why there's that sort of speech at the end when she has that really deep conversation with Henry at the table where she, you know, they talk about hope, because that was sort of ultimately the final message of the movie, is that in spite of all of it, there is still hope.
But you also always keep in check the fact that we need to have an adrenaline rush watching your film. And also the comedy is so vital. I mean, when I was watching the film, I was, you know, so stressed out, but then there was so much comedic relief and excitement watching the film. You know, tell us about calibrating the comedy and the rush.
Yeah, it's funny. This is different from like some of my previous films. They're horror comedies, and so like you blend the two genres quite a bit, and it's more of an absurdist approach to stuff. And then here, I was trying to use the comedy, as I said earlier, as sort of a release valve, and so that it's more grounded. However, it still pops in, you know, and gives the audience a chance to laugh. I'm just also like, I mean, some people here who know me, like I don't take myself too seriously. And so like, I like to have a laugh and I want people to have a good time. And so I think I've always used humor as a way to just kind of help the audience find some kind of release, you know, and in a moment. And I don't know, it's
And
fun.
at the heart of it, there's a love story, and we watch in real time their love relationship grow and blossom. Tell us about calibrating that aspect of the film.
I mean, I think what's fun about the movie is when we were making the movie, everybody shared their worst date stories, and I'm sure everyone here has had one. And I think what's fun about the movie is that it's such a relatable premise to like everyone stepping into a first date feels scared, feels vulnerable. They're trying to sort of manage their impression. There's a lot of pressure. And then add to that, a psychopath, tormenting you and holding your son hostage. But I really wanted the movie to still be a romance. I'm very inspired by, Hitchcock, and Rear Window specifically is a movie that I return to a lot. And that movie has such a beautiful romance inside of it. I don't know. I just think that I wanted people to root for this couple. That they would somehow make it out of this alive. And what's interesting about the movie, too, is that, it's a bit of a reversal in terms of certain tropes. I mean, Henry is the damsel in distress in the movie, and he doesn't even know it. And if Violet didn't have her past, she would probably poison that dude in a second, right? But because she's been controlled by a man, because she's been manipulated by a man, and tormented by a man, she has decided she's not letting that happen again. And the only way to do that is she's going to keep this guy alive somehow. And so I love that she's the knight in shining armor in this movie, and that she is protecting him every step of the way, even though he's oblivious to it, and he actually thinks he's on a shitty date. But also I think that he has an instinct as well that something is not right. Because he's been communicating with this woman for months. He knows that she's cool. So, like, why is she acting like such a psycho tonight? But yeah, the romance was a big component for me. And I wanted this to be like a date night movie for a lot of people too. I'm a softie that way. No, because seriously though, like, if you're on a date, your date is probably better than this one. I hope. You win.
Yeah. You mentioned Rear Window. When I was watching your film, I couldn't put together that you were working on Scream and Wes Craven, and one of my favorite Wes Craven movies is Red Eye. Was there an homage to Red Eye?
Absolutely, there was.
If you haven't seen Red Eye, guys, go home and watch Red Eye.
It's a good movie. It's a really good movie.
So underrated.
It is. When I read the script, the first draft, I immediately thought of that movie, and I thought, wow, this could be, it could feel like that. And I'm a huge Wes Craven fan, so it just made sense. But yeah, it's very much a love letter, I think, to that movie and to him.
And tell us about Red Eye. You're locked in one site.
And that was even harder. Like Red Eye is, I don't know if anyone's, I mean, some people have probably
seen it. It takes place
it's in a plane.
It's Cillian Murphy and Rachel McAdams.
And they are really close together. And a majority of the movie is that, just two people sitting next to each other on an airplane.
And Rear Window, we're just in that apartment. Yeah. So tell us about working on the fact that you're locked in one site.
Single location movies, it's like a subgenre that you're either in or you're out. I love them because you are inviting the audience to be trapped with you in this confined space. And I think it sort of automatically tees up this kind of boiler scenario, this kind of sense of confinement and claustrophobia. Even in a space that's as big as the one in here, there's still an element of claustrophobia. You are trapped. Mm-hmm. Psychologically you're trapped, physically you're trapped. And so I think that there's a lot of fun in that. And just from a creative standpoint, for me, like, it was just an enormous challenge to do that. To just keep people in one space and just to keep that as interesting as possible.
Mm-hmm. The climax, it's epic.
Bad shit.
Tell us about
unreasonably bad shit, but that's what I love. So,
tell us about the stunts, the whole choreography.
It was a lot. The original script ended in the restaurant, obviously we knew if you're going to set a movie in a high rise, you better put someone out a window. Like that's just, you are wasting everyone's time. But the thing that was so funny is that, it's one thing to write something or to work with writers on that thing and be like, yeah, no problem. And then you realize, oh, wait, we have no money. And then you find out that you have to build your entire set a good 25 to 30 feet off the ground so that you can actually shoot that stuff later. And so that was the biggest challenge, was just like, this enormous set that was floating off the ground, just so we could get to that stuff. And Megan Fahey, she's the biggest trooper in the world, and by the way, one of the best actors I've ever worked with. She was in a harness for several days, a good 30 feet off the ground, was not very comfortable. So that really sucked for her, and I sat comfortably at a monitor and enjoyed it. It was hard. It was a lot of work. There were a lot of it took an enormous amount of planning for such a small, tiny piece of the film, but we had a great team, and it ended up being a lot of fun to
And tell
to
us
do.
about casting Megan. We loved her in The White Lotus. How did it come about? You zero in on her.
Yeah, saw her on that show. I was amazed by her. I thought that she had for a character that could have been so aloof, and kind of, she did something really magical that I think drew people in, and that's just her magnetism. And so I felt like she had a really special star quality to her, and, aggressively pursued her, and, we met for coffee, and, it was just one of those things where we really hit it off, and she walked away from it, and I felt like, okay, I think I have her. And I was so fortunate because she really is amazing. She's an incredible, incredible actress. There's nothing she can't do. Yeah.
Nitpicking, I love the choice of the red jumpsuit.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Somebody laughed about the red jumpsuit.
We're selling them in the back, so if you want one. No. The red jumpsuit, I wanted her to be in a deep red, because I wanted her to pop on the set, knowing that we would do a lot of angles where we might need to be able to find her, and also just sort of like as your sort of main character. And it was a little bit of a De Palma thing, maybe a big De Palma thing. But we needed it to be sexy, but like mom sexy, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like,
and be able to do stunts?
That's what it was, too. It had to be functional. It needed to be something she could do stunts in. It needed something that we could double. We made 30 of those.
Wow.
Because
Do you own one of them?
I did. I tried one on. I actually, on our very, very last shot, before we wrapped the whole movie, the costume department did make me a jumpsuit. And no one knew about it, and I walked on set wearing it, and she died. Yeah. It was comfortable, by the way. I didn't feel bad. But yeah, it was a combination of functionality. It was a combination of just pop and beauty and glamour, and it had to feel like something special, which is why we obviously highlight at the beginning of the movie that she's kind of putting on work clothes, because that's really all she has. But she's kind of bought this. I feel like a lot of people buy things that are almost like borderline alter ego. It's like, if I were this confident person, I would wear this, but then they talk themselves out of the outfit. And I feel like she's done that, but the whole outfit was meant to be a symbol of possibility, and hope again.
Yeah.
And that's why her sister, who's her champion, is like, put this on. This is who you are, if you want to be. And so, yeah.
This person will remain nameless, but I'm friends with one of your crew, and I heard about a flash mob that happened during the shooting.
Yeah, I've said this before. Normally I loathe a flash mob. I loathe group outbursts of joy. And we were on set, and it was the last day with our background. Now, the thing about background is interesting because it's on a lot of movies, I feel like especially here in the States, like background, first of all, is notoriously mistreated. They're always like pushed aside and barked at on a bullhorn. And what was so nice about shooting this movie is that we had the same people come back day after day after day, and we're kind of in this nice environment. And in between setups, I found myself landing at different tables and sitting with them, and I wanted to know their stories. And so I got to know most of them pretty well. And so on the last day, we were setting up a shot, and I heard music, and I looked over my shoulder, and I saw everybody kind of dancing, and I was like, oh, that's cute. They're getting their wiggles out. Because it's like you're sitting all day, so you get bored. And then I looked back again, and I realized that they were all doing the same thing. And they had all learned a choreographed dance that my assistant had worked on with them. And like, it was so crazy and ridiculous, and I actually was so moved it brought me to tears, just because that they took the time. You know, like nobody would do that. Like, it's just very unusual, but they were beautiful people. And I actually just got a photo from all of them last night at a theater in Ireland, in Dublin, Ireland, and they all went together to see it, which I thought was pretty cool.
This film, and the best is yet to come for you, but this film just highlights everything that you're good at. Did you feel while you were making it that, like, I'm excelling at?
No. Definitely not that feeling. I don't think I've ever had that feeling in my life. That's the truth. If you don't have imposter syndrome, you don't belong in Hollywood. When we were making, it's funny, all you can do is let yourself be enveloped by the experience of making something with a group of people.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to tell, like, because you don't sit off in the corner and be like, yeah, I'm crushing it. Like, most of the time you feel really insecure. You feel like you're blowing it.
Yeah.
You know, that's the truth. And you're stressed and worried. And there are moments where you're like, wow, that's a beautiful shot. Or like, there are moments of truth from an actor that bring you to tears. But the totality of it never hits you like, okay, this is gonna be great. But I'm always very taken by the privilege of the job. And how cool it is that I get to work with all these talented people, and we try to make something, and I try to just find the joy in the experience and the process and invite everybody to kind of join in that feeling. Because for me, it's like, yeah, there's like the part of the job that is about trying to make something that works, that you're proud of, or maybe that is, by studio standards, you know, a success. But for me, the success of the experience is the journey. And so that's the part I cherish the most. And I try not to overthink, like, is it good or is it bad? I just try to make it good.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, I'm your biggest fan, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Roger.
The best is yet to come.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.